So we've looked at some of the basics for InDesign, but let's go back and look at some of the other things that we can do that can add a little bit more style to our documents. So I already have InDesign open, but I don't have a document up. So I'm just going to add a new document. I'm just going to stick with the standard letter size and press OK. So we've talked about shapes, and we've talked about dropping things in and text boxes and those things. So I'm going to do a little bit of that real fast, just to give us something to actually work with. So let's make a text box, maybe sort of like this. And this will be our title for the document, and we'll just make it pretty large. Maybe larger. There we go. And we can choose our fonts, and we can choose our style of that font, or the weight of that font. As mentioned before, we can choose the color. We can even give it an outline color if we want. And let's give it something to actually sit on. So here's a rectangle, and let's make it maybe blue, and let's get rid of that gross outline. Now right now this is pretty plain, and even putting this on top of that isn't going to be super amazing. But we can add a little bit more variety to this. Actually, I don't like that pink. Let's change that to white. There we go. Let's make this a little bit more interesting. If I click this button here, this will let me modify the corners. Now it's going to change them all at once. Now if I only want to change one, I can hold Shift and I can pull that corner over as far as I want, and I can do the same on whichever corners I want to modify. I'm going to click on this little yellow dot, and I'm just going to modify these. So I'm going to drag this one over holding Shift because I only want to change that one. And I think I want to drag this one over, so I'm going to hold Shift and move that one over, drag this one back, and drag this one over. Now I'm not being very precise, I'm kind of just dragging it wherever, but when I'm doing that, if I have a little bit of patience and I hold Shift and drag, you can see it's actually telling me how far over I'm dragging it, so that way I can choose to be consistent across my documents if that's what I want to do. Although consistency is normally a good thing, by the way. Copy and paste that one. So now I can kind of make this one small, and it can go there. That's kind of fun, I guess. Now, most of that isn't that impressive or that new because I've shown a lot of that already. I'm going to go ahead and drag in an image. I'm just going to drag in one of these images that I have here. Which one do I think I want to use? I think I'm going to use this one here. It makes it a little bigger so you can actually see what I'm looking at. So just this image here of this guy walking along with the little elephants following him, and of course you got the little cute one there with the blanket on his back. So I have InDesign. I'm just going to drag this over. Right now it is on my cursor, waiting for me to drop it on the file. I can either just click, or if I don't want it to be that huge, I can instead click and drag and tell it how large I want it to be. So maybe like that big. And I think I want this to be kind of here-ish, and I want to be behind those boxes and that text. And that's a little too high up, so let me drag this down. And of course I have my picture too because I dragged across, so now I'll bring my picture back up. Now I can't really see my elephants, so it's just a bunch of brush, and that's kind of silly. So I'm actually going to change these, and what I can do is if I right click on this, I can go into effects, and I have a lot here. The specific one I want right now is transparency. Similar to Photoshop and other programs, we have blending modes. like color. And if we hit preview, you can see what it does. Or saturation, or difference, or different things like that. So I can do color, and I can press OK, and I can do it on this one, and that one, and etc. Or I can hold Shift, and I should be able to change it for all three at once. There we go. And I think that looks much more interesting. Now let's bring this down a little bit, because it's still a little bit hard to see them. Maybe kind of like that. Move this over so it's actually with the edge of sort of the safe area. And we'll talk about some of this a little bit later, but essentially your margins and where it should be safe to print stuff here. I think I actually want to move this all over a little bit too, but not quite to the edge. I think kind of around there, and maybe this just a little bit further down. Let's create one more little maybe strip of color. Maybe this one is that magenta I tried earlier. And let's get rid of the outline. And we'll send this, actually we'll bring this to fronts. Bring to fronts. And I think I want to play with the effects just a little bit. I don't think I want to do color. I think I want to actually keep it normal, but I want to just reduce the opacity. So maybe kind of like that. Now this is still a bit tacky, but the idea is that you're getting to see some of the things that you can do if you want to do them. You still need to use a little bit of design sense and make sure that it actually looks good and that it actually enhances the design and isn't just a distraction from the content. In effects, we also have like drop shadow and some of these other options, so not just the transparency here, but some of these also. And you can access them from transparency and just click on down. Or, when you're going to effects, you can choose the one that you want to look at, like this drop shadow here, maybe a directional feather, or a gradient feather. I think that's a little bit better. We'll put this on the bottom. I'm just going to type it in. We'll just type in 90. And we can play with these handles to adjust how much is being shown and the fade of that as well. Actually, I think I want this to be... Oh, that was the issue. I want it to be negative 90. Negative 90. There we go. I don't quite like that shadow. Let's decrease the distance. Maybe increase the feathering a little bit. Actually, I don't like the shadow at all. I think that looks pretty good. So maybe, why might I have that fade? Maybe Africa's disappearing elephants. And of course, that's way bigger than the text box. And so that little plus there is saying like, hey, you've got extra text that we can't see. So I could click that, and that will let me put it somewhere else, and they link together. Or we'll just Command Z twice, or I could just make this bigger to try to accommodate that text, and it is quite big, so I probably need to actually make the text a bit smaller. And you can see the fade is going across all of the text, not each line individually. Let's maybe drop this back down to 36. And still a little too big. 30. Let's decrease the character spacing a little bit. And now that the text is smaller, I feel like this needs to be smaller to match. There we go. Now, what if we don't want to drop one picture in? What if we want to make a whole bunch of pictures? Like, we want a gallery of images, and we want them all to be the same. Now, how do we do that? We could try to draw these all out, although I'm using shapes instead of actual frames, so let's fix that. I could try to draw them all out and try to make sure they're exactly the same, and it will try to give me little clues to help me out here, but this is really inefficient. There is no reason to do it this way. The better way is actually just to go to our folder where we have all of our images that we want, grab the ones we want, maybe all of these, drag them on here, and now we have them all on our cursor. So you can see the little 8 there. That means I have 8 images ready and waiting. Now I could drop these down individually, however large or small I want, but if I want them all to be uniform, I'll just Command Z a few times to put them back on there. I can instead drag this out, and I can press right to add more as far as like columns go, and I can press up to add rows, so this will actually drop them into that pattern. Now I chose 8, and this is 3 by 3, so I really should have 9, but it's okay. And there you go. You can see they're all the same size, and they are all loaded in there. All the gaps are nice and the same. And let's do fill frame proportionally instead, because I prefer that. And now if some of these are a little off, like I don't like that giraffe's head being that close to the edge, I can double click, of course, and move it around. And each one of these is, of course, its own separate object. They are not grouped together. I just drop them all in at once. And then maybe I have a little text box down here that has like the captions for them or something along those lines. There we go. And let's fill that with placeholder text. Marvelous. And one more neat thing to show you really quickly. Let's say that I want something a little different than just a regular picture. Like maybe I want it to say Africa really large, but I actually want this picture to be inside of the text itself. So let's switch this back to Arial Black again. I think that's what I was using there. And let's do like a really large font, like 120. And even that, it's a little too big for this box, but it's okay, I can make it bigger. Now what I'm going to do is let's align this where I want it to be, sort of on this image, just to kind of visualize what's going to be in the box. I'm going to have it selected, and I'm going to go up here to type, and I'm going to tell it that I want this to be an outline, so create outlines. I'm going to copy this picture, so Command C, and I can actually delete it now. And I'm going to right click the text here that I've created as an outline, and I'm going to tell it to paste into. And now I have this picture actually inside of that text, and I can even actually move it around still if I don't quite like where it went. Unfortunately, I lost the little elephant with the blanket, but that's okay, I guess. And there you go. There's a few neat little tricks that you can try out in InDesign.